A Dragon's Love Part 2, a paranormal shifter romance by R.S. Holloway, brought to you by romancely.com.
Blurb. Joy and Longwei couldn't be more different. Joy is an American reporter who loves the fast life and getting the latest scoop. Longwei is, well, an East Asian man who can shift into a dragon. Yet somehow the two have overcome their incompatibility on paper and now share the kind of love found once in a lifetime. But it's not all plain sailing, however. Longwei's unique shifting abilities have attracted attention from the wrong kind of people, namely the notorious Triad. The couple and their people have survived one attack, but will their relationship and even their lives ever be the same with this looming threat? Listen on to find out now. Chapter 1. Joy squinted her eyes in effort as she pulled on the wrench. In the 2 weeks since the Triad attack, one of her main jobs in the village was helping Longwei and some of the others who had experience with cars and other vehicles break down the 4 leftover trucks from the attack. She was amazed with the variety of ways the villagers had put different truck parts to use. Seat belts had been stripped out, unwound, and the belting used to repair a plow harness for one of the farms. Engines were pulled out and mounted on wooden stands to act as electrical generators, while drive shafts were converted for the village's windmills. Even the windshields had been used, with 2 of the houses in the village now sporting what Joy could only think of as picture windows. Today, Joy was helping on one of the biggest jobs Longwei had devised for the trucks. It was going to be a multi-stage project, requiring months of work from everyone, but once set up, the village would become totally self-sufficient in terms of fuel and heating for the winter. Joy didn't understand it all, but was more than willing to lend a hand where she could, which left her here, grease and grime up to her elbows, pulling with all of her might on a wrench, trying to free the last nut holding the oil pump to the main frame of the truck. She had volunteered for the job, as she was the only person with the right combination of strength and small frame to get into the tight space. Unfortunately, the bolts had been seated with a pneumatic impact wrench, and getting them loose with the hand tools the village had was difficult. Gritting her teeth with effort, she pulled with all of her might on the wrench, grunting with the strain. Suddenly the bolt loosened with an audible squeal. Unfortunately for Joy, the lack of resistance from the bolt meant that her hand smacked against the frame, her knuckles busting on the dirt-encrusted steel. She cried out, sucking on her knuckle as she hopped around, trying not to cry from the pain. "You okay?" Joy turned and saw one of the village's schoolchildren, a teenage boy named Jian, coming around from the other end of the truck. He had a screwdriver in hand from his job of removing the taillights. Since joining the village, Joy had helped teach the children English along with Longwei, and the children had taken to it much more than they had previously. Longwei thought that it was due to the fact that with a real living reason to use the language, the children were more motivated. Joy pulled her knuckle from her mouth, looking at the oozing blood. "No, I think I need a bandage. Where's the first aid kit?" When Jian tilted his head and smiled, shaking head that he didn't understand, Joy tried again in Chinese. She was still horrible in the village's dialect, but she tried her best. Perhaps it was the sight of the blood, or maybe she actually was getting better at village Chinese, but Jian nodded and jogged off towards the doctor's office. Joy followed behind, walking in the clear midsummer's day. It was truly beautiful, and despite the pain, Joy smiled at the quiet pleasantness. It wasn't far to the doctor's office, only about half a mile, but by the time she got there, the sting from her knuckles was lessening. Entering the cool, shadowy office, Joy was warmed to see that Jian had already talked to the doctor, who waited for her. Patting Jian on the shoulder, she smiled and said thank you as best she could, before Jian jogged off again, back to his work. Joy watched him go before turning to the doctor. "Sorry, I didn't think he was going to come all the way here. I just asked him for a first aid kit." Dr. Wong, whose English was passable if heavily accented, smiled. "We don't have any besides normal household items, and this office is closer than your home." Joy chuckled at the idea of her home. While she and Longwei had never publicly said so, it seemed the entire village knew that their living arrangement was not just village elder and guest, but as lovers. She still maintained her own bedroom, and Longwei always treated her rooms as her own private space like an apartment, but they shared meals together, and at least half the time slept together in Longwei's room. It was a new experience for her, being this close to someone. "Well, thank you for treating me," Joy said, holding out her hand. The truck didn't want to let go of its oil pump, Wang looked at Joy's hand for a few seconds before shaking his head. I must clean this. Too much grease and dirt. This will hurt some. Getting up from his chair, Wang led her over to an exam table before going over to his supply cabinet. It was like no other doctor's cabinet Joy had ever seen, filled with an odd collection of modern supplies, herbal remedies, and things she couldn't even begin to put a name to. With the village being so isolated and not on friendly terms with either the Triads or the government, he had to make do with a lot of substitutions. Wang turned around, holding a square of cloth and a bottle of clear liquid which made Joy cringe. One of the main substitutions Wang had to often use was a strong alcohol instead of normal topical antiseptics. Stronger than any vodka she had tried in the U.S., Wang's alcohol was made of squeezings from cut bamboo and rice, which were fermented to eye-watering strength. Soaking a section of his cloth in the alcohol, Wang cleaned the skin surrounding Joy's cut knuckle, his free hand holding her fingers still against the unstoppable twitch as the exposed nerves were assaulted by the stinging liquid. Squeezing her eyes shut against the pain, Joy kept her lips pursed as Wang tutted and fretted over the wound, wiping at it carefully with his cloth. Finally, he looked up. You lucky, he said with a smile. Clean to the bone, but no other damage. That's lucky? Joy asked incredulously. And what is unlucky? Tendon cut, bone broken, or nicked vein, Wang replied. He patted her hand and went back to his cabinet, returning with another square of clean cotton cloth. Now, I give you some of the alcohol for keeping it clean. No drinking, he said mock seriously, a twinkle in his eye. Clean twice a day and come to me if it gets red or pus. Change this bandage every day, keep it clean. No stitches? Joy asked, looking at her hand. With the dirt cleaned off and the blood wiped away, she thought she could see the faintest hint of white bone. Feeling just a bit nauseous, she turned her eyes away. No need, Wang replied. Small cut, only 1 centimeter. You will have scar, but will heal fine if you keep it clean. So no more work on the truck today? 1 week, no dirty work, Wang said with a smile. Maybe help school children? Joy sighed and nodded, smiling. She'd have to talk to Longwei and the school teachers, but she was sure she could do something besides sit around all day. Leaving the doctor's office, she headed back to the temple, or, as Dr. Wang said, her home. Making her way through the large stone and wooden gate of the temple, Joy felt a wave of peace pass over her, even more than the normal peacefulness of village life. The courtyard of the temple was shaded by pine trees, with the stone and wood constructions stretching out horizontally rather than vertically. Joy didn't know what, if any, religion the temple was associated with, but it didn't matter to her. The building spoke of peace and tranquility to her. Heading inside, Joy found Longwei in the temple room that served as a village office. He was looking over a small pile of papers, which were tightly packed with writing on both sides. Joy knocked on the frame, causing Longwei to look up. Hi, he said, setting the papers aside. Spying the white wrapping against the normal brown of her hand, he stood up, concerned. What's with your hand? Joy showed him the cut, carefully unwrapping the cloth Dr. Wang had used. The truck bit me, she joked, as Longwei held her hand gingerly. Doc Wang said no dirty work for a week. Well, there goes my idea, Longwei said with a smile as he kissed her. His long tongue caressed hers, sweeping against her lips before he stepped back. Unless, Joy laughed, and pushed Longwei back, enjoying the feel of his chest muscles under her hands. Not right now, love. So what were you studying so intently? Just some reports from the villagers. I try to get around as much as I can, but this village still has almost 3,000 people in it, spread out over a large area, mostly farms. Some of the more outlying farms I don't see more than once a week. Anything important? Well, one family is expecting a baby, another has a pig in ill health, nothing out of the ordinary. Since we're a very communal village, it falls on me to help sort out work and other things in these situations. Joy just shook her head. She understood that the village ran under a strange, seemingly archaic blend of feudal and communistic systems. She knew that the village's belief in Longwei and his supposedly dragon-inspired wisdom helped. But she also knew most of Longwei's wisdom came not from any supposed magical dragon blood, but him working hard and using all of the learning he had gathered in obtaining his master's degree and his travels. I'm sure you'll do your best, she said, as she always told him in these situations. He had confided in her that her presence was a comfort, because it gave him someone to confide in that didn't see him as a mythological being. So, with me stuck, unable to use my hand for a week, what can I do to help? Let's have lunch and we can talk about it then. That afternoon, Joy walked out to the farm that was the ostensible reason why she was in the village. Ying Tai, the young woman whose life she saved, was sitting in the doorway of her family's small house, holding a bai luobo radish with the crook of her injured arm, while rubbing the dirt away using a soft brush in the other. Her burned hand was still wrapped, although her healing was progressing well. When she looked up from her work and saw Joy, she set her work aside carefully and greeted her with a wave of her good hand and a smile. Joy returned the wave, waving with her hands for the woman to sit down. Ying Tai's English was almost non-existent, so Joy tried her best in the village's dialect of Chinese. How's your hand? My hand is good. Do you still have pain? Some. Here Ying Tai said a string of words that Joy didn't understand. Still hurts. It feels better bit by bit. I'm glad. How did you hurt your hand? Joy wasn't sure how to say the proper words in Chinese, so she pantomimed the truck, the wrench, and her accident for Ying Tai. The young Chinese woman watched intently, listening to each of Joy's English words, repeating them softly to herself as Joy told her story. When Joy showed her the cut, which had now crusted over into a rather ugly scab, she clucked her tongue in commiseration. We will both have scars now. It adds character, Joy said, chuckling. Can I help with your work? Ying Tai nodded, and the two women sat down, both cradling vegetables under their forearm while they cleaned with their uninjured hand. Joy thought as she cleaned how much her life had changed in just the few months since she had come to the village. She went from trying to be the next Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter, cutting her teeth on corruption investigations of the Triad and the Chinese government, to the only black woman in probably 100 miles, living in a rural Chinese village, happily scrubbing radishes while being the girlfriend/lover of the village leader, who just happened to not only be handsome and smart, but a shapeshifter who could become a dragon at will. Quite a change for a 26-year-old woman from the poor side of Washington, D.C. Thank you, sister, Ying Tai said as they finished the last radish. Joy looked at her slightly perplexed, unsure if she had heard properly. Brushing off her hand on her pants, she nodded her goodbye, before making her way back to the temple. When she got home, the sun was starting to go down, which meant for most of the village, bedtime was approaching. With few lights and little money to waste on candles or oil lamps, most of the village rose and went to bed by the sun. Joy still hadn't totally adapted to the time schedule of the village, but still felt tired. Going inside, she found Longwei just finishing his cooking in the kitchen. I thought I should cook tonight, considering you have a bad hand, he said, emptying out his wok onto 2 plates. Most of the pile was vegetables, although Joy thought she saw some browned bits of meat that she thought might be rabbit. It was a habit of Longwei to catch a rabbit or two whenever he did dragon training. Thanks, Joy said, sitting down at the low table. Hey, can you help me? I stopped by Ying Tai's house, and at the end she used a word that I wanted you to help me with. Sure, what was it? Joy tried her best to replicate the pronunciation of Ying Tai's words, surprised when Longwei smiled. Wow, she thinks a lot of you. Will you just tell me what she meant? She called you sister. The real meaning isn't a family sister, but more of a sisterhood attained through shared hardship, mutual sacrifice, and shed blood. It's normally not used anymore. It's kind of an old-fashioned word. It's most commonly used in some of the old classics to describe the bond between 2 warrior women or something similar. Joy sat stunned, thinking about what a gift Ying Tai had bestowed upon her. She was an only child, and to have someone reach out to her like this was both scary and wonderful at the same time. I'm not really sure how I should respond. I mean, I'm overjoyed, but I don't know how to express how I should accept the honor. Just be you. We're village Chinese, not Japanese. We don't get hung up on the formality of it all. If you'd like, I can offer to help with any translation next time you go out there. I think I'd like that, but I'm sure you're a busy man, especially as you're now a hand short on breaking up those trucks. I'm not worried. I'm actually more worried that we haven't gotten any more visits from the Triads, or the local government. Joy set down her chopsticks, confused. What do you mean? I figured that attack would be the end of it. Longwei shook his head. Part of me wants to believe that, but I don't think so. It's been a long time since the Triads came around here. I'm sure most of it was due to the fact we're still a poor village, and it just wasn't worth the effort. It was easier to ignore us instead. Now that we've kicked that hornet's nest, I doubt they are going to just let it go. Joy pondered Longwei's words, eating her food in silence. When she was finished, she set her bowl down and looked Longwei in the eyes. Two ideas come to my mind. Oh, and what is that? The first is Sun Tzu. Attack where your enemy cannot defend, and defend where your enemy cannot attack. The second is from sports. The best defense is a good offense. Longwei nodded. What do you propose? As long as we sit here in the village, we're not going to last. Your people were whittled down over however long it took using that method. Instead, maybe we need to move around, stay mobile, and take the fight to them. What do you suggest? That I tell everyone to pack up all their stuff and we become a band of nomads? Joy laughed. Not quite. Instead, I was thinking that our partnering in Hefei produced a lot of good results. What if you and I hit the Triads where they don't expect us? If we keep them so off balance trying to figure out where we are and what we're doing, they might just leave the village alone. Where were you thinking? Longwei asked, his green eyes glowing with anticipation. Joy could see that regardless of his wisdom and his kindness, the dragon in him did want to attack his enemies. Well, they'd expect an attack in Hefei or Wuhan, both of which are major cities on either side of us. What if we hit at Chengdu or Chongqing? They're both major industrial cities, so they'll have heavy Triad presence. But both are pretty isolated. I was even thinking if we did want to up and try and move the entire village, the mountains in that area could easily swallow a whole village without any major problems. You realize what you're saying, right? This village has over 1,000 people living in it. You want to take the fight to the Triads with the possibility of moving the entire village? Joy shrugged. If the Triads attack in force again, I don't think we can avoid casualties, even with your powers. We were only able to scavenge about 300 rounds total for the rifles, and they won't be stupid enough to attack by rolling right down the road next time. They'll come in from all sides and envelop us. Longwei cocked his head, looking at Joy askance. Where did you become an expert in military tactics? 2 ways, Joy chuckled. First, by living in some of the worst neighborhoods of Washington, D.C., I got to understand gang warfare on a first-hand basis. Then, when I went to college, the area I tended to focus in on for my elective history courses was military history. For a while there, I even thought of going ROTC, except there was no way I could do that, and journalism at the same time. You keep surprising me, Longwei replied with a smile. But this is quite an undertaking. The initial attacks could be easy, but the idea of moving the village? That could be a difficult problem, not only because of the logistics, but because a lot of these families have been living in this village for 12 generations or more. There's a connection with this land that I'm worried a lot of these families will be unwilling to give up. Well, it was just an idea, Joy said. And you're right. I don't have the connection to the land that a lot of these families might. I just want everyone to be safe. Me too. But first, let's see if maybe we can cause some chaos in Chengdu. It's a huge city, and hitting the Triad there is going to be difficult. Although at least this time we don't have to worry about getting a ride from your friend Billy.
Chapter 2. Preparations for the trip to Chengdu were more difficult than Joy and Longwei's first infiltration to Hefei. Chengdu was much farther away, over 500 kilometers driving, and there was a lot they didn't know about the city. While the school's textbooks and downloaded cultural files on a computer could tell them how many people and some of the historical and cultural relevance of the ancient Grand City, the fact of the matter was that when it came to the Triads and the seedier side of the city of almost 8 million, they knew next to nothing. Even Joy's former investigations involving connecting the Triads to the government weren't helpful. Joy had been based in Shanghai, near the coast, and had focused a lot of her investigations in the financial hub, along with the connections between Shanghai, Beijing, and Hong Kong. However, Chengdu was largely unknown to her, although she knew that its position was the westernmost important city in China, and that the Triads had to be entwined deeply into the roots of the city. Another obstacle was finding someone to take over in Longwei's absence. For too long, the village had looked to Longwei and his ancestors as the only decision-making authority in village matters, and the idea of the village going without a dragon shifter at its head for an indefinite amount of time seemed to paralyze a lot of them. Joy lost count of the number of meetings Longwei held with various villagers, from small groups to a few that involved everyone, even the children. In the end, Longwei had to invoke his authority and appoint 3 village elders, including the doctor and the head teacher at the school, to act in his stead. Longwei was sure that even if one of them decided to go on a power trip, the other 2 could check him. At the same time, he made sure that each of them was wise, and in some ways he thought they may end up being better leaders than he was. The final obstacle was more practical. How were they supposed to live? The last operation had been fast and short, with both of them taking quick apartments that they hadn't even needed to pay rent on, except for a small deposit. They had relied on Joy's savings from her last few paychecks as a newspaper reporter, and had done fine. This time, in addition to even paying to get to Chengdu, they knew it would take more time to figure out how to hurt the Triad, and costs would be higher. The dodge of working at a nightclub wasn't going to work again, they were sure, as even the Triad as far away as Chengdu would be on the lookout for a curvaceous black American woman like Joy. Longwei, on the other hand, might blend in a bit better, as long as he didn't reveal his dragon nature. At least the transportation would be easy. They had siphoned enough gasoline from the Triad trucks that the one truck, still in full operating condition, could drive all the way to Chengdu without a problem. In addition, the trucks the Triad had used were relatively new, with none having more than 30,000 kilometers on them. Since the villagers had only used 2 rifles in the first attack, there was no bullet damage on the truck, and the few scrapes and scratches could be excused due to travel and rough driving. "I guess we're just going to have to wing it," Joy eventually said. "We don't have access to the internet. We don't even have a phone line until we get farther out. I mean, I can jack my cell phone into my laptop. It has a data plan, so I might get a signal, but it's not like we're going to have a lot of preparation." Longwei sighed, nodding. "This isn't the smartest move we could make. But it's the only one available. If you really feel the Triad will come back in force, we have to do something to pull them away and protect this village." The night before Longwei and Joy planned to depart from the village, they were surprised at dinner time to have a guest stop by. Yingtai came to the gate of the temple, a bag slung over her shoulder, her wrapped hand held gingerly in front of her. When Longwei greeted her, she responded with a liquid flow of Chinese that was so fast that Joy could not understand a single word she said. She kept repeating herself, it seemed, but Joy was quickly flummoxed at what she was trying to say. Finally, Yingtai stopped and looked at Joy. "Please," she begged, her voice heavy with emotion. "What did she ask?" Joy asked Longwei, who looked at the young woman seriously. Whatever had been said, Longwei was obviously thinking seriously. "Come on, Longwei, what did she say?" Longwei shook his head to clear his thoughts and turned his attention back to Joy. "She wants to come with us." Most of it was begging to be allowed to come with us. "And what do you think?" Longwei sighed. "Yingtai's never left this village before. The farthest she's ever been is about 20 kilometers away, where there was once a traveling carnival that my father took the children to see. We trekked all day to go see that carnival, and when we got there, they were packing up to leave. They hadn't realized that our village was the only thing within distance, and were going to move on. My father convinced them to come to the village for the evening, so we were at least able to enjoy a little bit of some of the minor magic acts and things like that." Joy looked at Yingtai, whose face was filled with hope and confusion at the unknown conversation. Shifting to her Chinese, Joy patted her on the shoulder. "Yingtai, why do you want to come with us?" Thankfully, Longwei was able to translate for her. "I want to help. I cannot be helpful at home, and I can be helpful." "What do you think you can do?" Yingtai smiled. "I can do the things you cannot. I can get work in companies where low-level triads come. I can work in laundries, or a restaurant, or other businesses that triads shake down. With 2 Chinese working, we double our chance of success." Joy couldn't fault Yingtai's logic. "You know what you're saying is dangerous. If the triads know that you have given information to Longwei—" "I know, but it is safer than staying put," Yingtai replied. "There are a few of us who feel the same way." "How many?" "About a dozen of us." Yingtai rattled off a list of names, which caused Longwei to smile. Joy could understand about half of the names, and noticed that they were all younger, in their late teens to early 20s, those who had grown up under the constant looming threat of triad or governmental reprisal without actually directly feeling either. It was a dangerous group to have involved. They were idealistic, they were passionate, and they had no clue about just how dangerous the reality of their situation was. Joy could at least partially understand, even if she didn't know everything. She had grown up in some pretty mean streets and had months of experience of direct investigation of the Triad. She knew what they would do to people who they even suspected of being a threat. She had seen the photographs of the tortured bodies and dismembered victims grotesquely displayed as a threat to the entire neighborhood, that this is what happens to those who went against the Triad. The most these young people knew were a few stories and a bloodless victory against an overconfident, ambushed small group fighting on unfamiliar territory. The Chengdu Triads would know the streets and would have the advantage. Still, though, she knew that if they were really going to bring the village's dream to fruition and ever have a chance of achieving their quixotic dream of toppling the Triads, their movement had to grow. Sometimes it took blind faith to do that. "All right," Joy finally replied, looking at Longwei for approval. "But only Yingtai right now. On a very practical note, the truck can only hold 3 people in the cab, and I'm not transporting people in the back like the Triad did." Longwei nodded and translated Joy's answer to Yingtai, whose smile did little to assuage her feeling that she had just doomed the girl. She felt tears spring to her eyes as Yingtai said in English, "Thank you." Departing the village was hard for Joy. She was surprised at how much she had become used to the quiet atmosphere and the peaceful people. There was even a little bit of fear in her mind as she contemplated once again living in an area of 12 million people for a few months. She glanced over at Yingtai, whose face was set in grim lines, and realized she was even more scared. The poor girl had probably never seen more than a few thousand people in her entire life. The cab of the truck was a bit tighter than what Joy would have liked, but thankfully Yingtai was rather small, fitting nicely in between Joy and Longwei in the front seat. The rear bench seat, a tiny excuse for a seat that Joy thought would be good for nothing more than cargo, could also be used by Yingtai if she stretched out across the whole bench. All of their bags were placed in the back of the truck underneath a canvas tarp that was tied down securely. Also in the back were 4 cans of gas, totaling about another 5 gallons. It seemed the entire village turned out to wish them good luck. The 3 new leaders exchanged quiet words with Longwei, who patted each of them on the shoulders before smiling and addressing the assembled group. Looking out, Joy spotted some of the youngsters Yingtai had named, most of them with looks of envy on their face as their friend said goodbye to her parents. When Longwei was done, the 3 of them piled into the truck, with Joy at the wheel. She and Longwei would switch off driving, but Yingtai didn't know how to even start the vehicle. Pulling away slowly to avoid any accidents, she drove through the village, carefully going around the spot where the road had been dug out and still not totally filled in. It took them close to a half hour to make it back out to a paved road, but from there things quickly dropped into a road trip tedium, with miles and miles of blacktop broken up by small hamlets and gas stations. One of the things that surprised Joy was the lack of shopping or other roadside distractions. In the little driving she had done in Shanghai, and even most of the way from Shanghai to Hefei, the roads were somewhat similar to the United States. The large highways had rest stops that contained a gas station, some sort of convenience store, and some other amenities. But the road towards Chengdu was eerie. The highway rolled on like a black ribbon through green, uninhabited areas, or small hamlets and towns, with almost nothing to break up the monotony. "This area is not very populated," Longwei explained. "And this part of China, at least until you approach Chengdu, is not very westernized. I'm glad, in fact, that we have the gas in the back of the truck." At about noon, the trio stopped on the side of the road to each lunch. They were about a third of the way to Chengdu, near the city of Yichang. "Might as well stop here," Joy said. "The map says there isn't much here until a small city called Enshi, then Chongqing, then Chengdu. At least I have a cell signal here and can get a data connection." Joy logged into the internet, spending the next 2 hours deleting emails and researching. Luckily, she was quickly able to arrange 2 interviews for the following days at English schools in the city, which would at least provide them an in. Simultaneously, she started downloading as much information as she could on Chengdu, in both Chinese and English for Longwei to be able to start his own research. The whole time, Yingtai looked over her shoulder, her eyes wide at how fast Joy was navigating on the laptop. Finally, as the battery was starting to die on her computer, Joy put it to sleep, plugging it into the solar charger she had gotten for her phone. The trickle charge would take practically the rest of the day to do anything, but the computer would hopefully be usable by the time they stopped for the night. Longwei took over driving in the afternoon, allowing Joy the chance to stretch out her legs in the passenger seat. Without the computer to use or even a book to read, Joy quickly felt bored. Yingtai elected to stretch out on the bench seat in the back, quickly nodding off as the highway rolled by. Joy knew that if she napped also, she wouldn't be able to sleep at night, so she tried talking to Longwei. "Hey, you doing okay over there? It's been quite a few years since I've driven seriously, but the driving isn't difficult. The weather's fine and I can see. How are you doing?" Joy laughed. "Honestly? Scared. We're really going to be poking the hornet's nest with this one. I know, but with you involved, we have our best chance of success. Can I ask you something, Longwei?" "Sure." Joy watched as they passed a rice paddy, an old man out in the field tending his crop. "What made you get on board with this? You were the village leader for a few years before I showed up. What made you decide to take the fight outside of the village all of a sudden?" "Some of it was forced on us," Longwei said. "I still don't understand why the Triad was so hot on your trail, but it seemed your coming was too much for them to consider the situation tolerable anymore. I'm not blaming you for that, you were doing the right thing, but after that first attack, I guess it woke something up in me. I spent years living in a fantasy land, hoping that things would change without ever trying to do something to help that change occur. But seeing them coming after you, that was different." "Is it because we're a couple?" Joy asked. "I mean, I love you, but you don't need to go white knighting me and charging out to take on the world on my behalf, and you shouldn't risk the village just for me." Longwei looked over at her, shaking his head. "You don't realize just how much of a change you made in the village, have you? Everyone sees you as part of us, regardless of where you were born or the fact that your Chinese is terrible." "Hey, it's not that bad," Joy said, a bit hurt. Longwei shook his head. "Sorry, not what I meant. I mean that your village Chinese is still pretty bad. Your Mandarin has been improving, actually. Thankfully, a lot of the younger villagers can understand Mandarin pretty well. They can't speak it, the accent is all wrong, but they can understand what you say. In any case," Longwei continued, "the whole thing just made me realize that if I really want to see the world free from the Triads and the people free from their yoke, I have to do something." "Why do you hate the Triads so much?" Joy asked curiously. "They are gangsters after all, but you're really motivated against them now. What's got you so personally involved?" "When they attacked you, it wasn't the first time the Triads have attacked someone I love," Longwei sighed. "They killed my father, and I suspect they killed my mother too." Joy sat back, stunned. "You never said how your parents died before." "It happened while I was in college in the States. My mom supposedly died of a snake bite. The problem is, poisonous snakes don't live around the village, and no snake was ever found. After I came back, my father started my training with a new intensity that I hadn't felt before. I knew then that he suspected the same thing I did." "So how did your father die?" Longwei sighed, the late afternoon sun casting a reddish-yellow tint to his face. "He was taking me to Wuhan because he wanted to bargain with an agricultural dealer for a few things that the village couldn't provide for itself. Also, Wuhan has a lot of lakes and rivers nearby, much more than the area around the village, and he wanted me to practice some of my dragon skills in the water. We arrived pretty late at night, both of us in dragon form because it allowed us to carry the goods on our backs very easily. Back then, my father had rigged a sort of harness that allowed us to carry almost 400 kilograms of rice or other items on our backs. We unloaded our load at a safe location, put on our clothes, and headed into the city. My dad always enjoyed these trips because they were a chance for him to indulge in some things we couldn't get in the village. Oh, he didn't go overboard, and he always brought some back for the children, but he insisted on always buying a chocolate bar as soon as he could on these trips." Joy smiled at the warmth in Longwei's voice as he recalled the details of the story. He spoke so little about his father, she always learned something new. "Go on." "We went into what I guess could be called a convenience store. It was about 1 a.m, and Dad pulled out the little bit of cash money we had with us. He buys maybe a chocolate bar for himself and a few bags of these little wrapped chocolates that he can hand out to the school children. We were headed out of the store when Dad was approached by a group of 4 men. They were Triad representatives. Until then, I didn't know that the village had a more or less formal agreement with the Triads. They stayed out of the village, and we stayed out of the city except for the agricultural visits. Even then, though, we were supposed to stay to a very limited area and deal only with those people the Triad said we could deal with. By going into the store, Dad had violated the terms of the agreement. So what happened? Longwei sighed, pain flashing in his eyes. That night? Nothing. The 4 men merely warned Dad that he was not welcome where we were. Dad backed down, not wanting to create a scene in public like we were, regardless of the time of night. We went back to where we had stashed the harnesses and caught some sleep. The next day, Dad and the agricultural rep met. Everything seemed fine, the negotiations were pretty straightforward, and the trucks came in to haul away our stuff. One of the trucks had the packages that Dad normally requested, and there was a little bit of money left over. Not much, maybe the equivalent of $50, but enough that we felt like we were doing something good for the village. Dad and I loaded it into my harness, since the whole thing weighed less than 100 kilograms, and waited for the men to leave before I changed. As I did, a shot rang out from an industrial park maybe 500 meters away. The bullet took my father in the head, just as he was unwrapping his chocolate bar. "My God!" Joy gasped, her face losing color as she imagined the scene. "What did you do?" Longwei stared out the front windshield for a long time, his eyes filling with tears. What could I do? My back had been turned away from the shot, and I had no idea which building the attack had come from. I picked up what was left of my father, placed his body in my harness, and left. At least they let me do that much. Tears tumbled down Longwei's cheeks as he recalled his father, and she reached across the center divider to lay her hand on his leg. "He raised a good man," Joy said, offering what scant comfort she could. "And I understand the pain of losing someone you love to violence." "What happened?" Longwei asked, his eyes glancing at her to see if she really understood. "I was 12 years old. Like I've said before, I grew up in some of the worst neighborhoods in Washington, places where you didn't go outside your house after dark, and even then, during the day, you moved like a soldier running through a battlefield sometimes. Like I said, I was 12. Down the street from me was another little girl. We were classmates in school. Her name was Nikki, and she and I would sometimes play together when we were smaller. Her brother had fallen in with one of the local gangs, though, and my mother had forbidden me from going over to her house. It put a damper on our friendship, but we still hung out every once in a while. When her birthday rolled around in June, she invited me to her party. I begged and pleaded with my mom to allow me to go, and finally she relented when Nikki promised that her brother wasn't going to be there. So I dressed up in one of my best outfits, which really wasn't much at the time. I wrapped up a present for her, Nelly Furtado's CD, which she would never admit to liking, but I kind of knew she really was into, and started down the street to the party. Joy looked out the window at the empty countryside rolling by, her mind 13 years and 10,000 miles in the past. I was maybe 2 houses away when I saw the car rolling down the street, probably the most stereotypical gangbanger car in the entire world, a 4-door Oldsmobile Cutlass that had been reconfigured into a low-rider. It was just one of those things you knew from the way it drove, kind of slow-like, but not the slow that meant it was looking for a house or something. I could see in the front windshield, and the driver had that intent look on his face, like he was keying himself up for something. When the side windows started rolling down, I jumped behind one of those large mailboxes that dotted the streets and hugged pavement. When the gangbangers opened up, I swore the entire world was being split apart with thunder. I could feel myself screaming in terror but couldn't hear anything until the driver hit the gas and that low rider peeled off down the street, leaving behind rubber, a few sparks, and 4 dead bodies. Nikki had taken a round in the heart, dying immediately, thank God. Some of the victims weren't so lucky. "Why did they shoot up the place?" Longwei asked, his face grim. "The brother?" Joy nodded. "Yeah, the brother. It seemed he had disrespected one of the other local gangs and had been caught getting frisky with their leader's girl. They didn't even know if he was home or not." "What was the aftermath?" Joy shook her head. "Same thing that happened with all of the shootings I heard about. A lot of people piling into the local AME church to wail and moan. A lot of pledges from local community leaders about doing something to stop the black-on-black crime, and not a lot else. The gangbangers continued their war on the down low, with the police stepping up patrols for a few weeks until the overtime became too expensive to justify any longer. By the time summer was over and school began again, it was just normal again. The brother even stayed in the same house, at least until I left for college. I heard he got shot sometime during my junior year, a lifetime ago, really, but the pain is still there. The shared pain put a damper on the conversation, and the miles rolled by silently until Yingtai woke up. "Where are we?" she asked. "I'm a little hungry, and my hand needs some lotion."
Chapter 3. Joy looked around the tiny apartment and sighed. She guessed the three of them had been lucky. After all, she had a job, albeit one that mostly consisted of singing songs with little kids, although there were some ambitious young workers who were desperate to improve their English in order to get ahead in their jobs. The job provided the apartment, and the management was willing to look the other way on the fact that Joy had 3 people living in an apartment designed for only one, as long as she didn't create any problems. They had food and clothing as well, with Yingtai finding her own job in a garment factory, running the automatic iron that pressed the pants that were produced on the sewing floor. The work was hot, dirty, and the pay was crap, but for Yingtai it was her first real work experience. In fact, she often bragged that the work was easy for her compared to her life in the village. "I sweat the same amount, but there's less dirt and no snakes," she would say as she relaxed. "Best of all, we have dramas." It was perhaps the only thing that Joy wished Yingtai hadn't picked up an affinity for, the so-called dramas, that to Joy seemed to be little more than soap operas. Yingtai was entranced with the television from almost the first time she turned it on, a tiny third-hand set that had come with their apartment. Joy constantly reminded herself that the young woman had grown up in a village where electricity was almost unheard of, and whose movie experience consisted of perhaps a half-dozen or so DVDs was still going through culture shock. "At least she hasn't gotten into fashionable clothes or designer knockoffs yet," Joy reminded herself on her day off as Yingtai sipped at tea and stared, zombie-like, at the screen. "And her hand is getting better." Joy finished the last touches on their dinners, a variation on cheeseburger helper that Joy had learned to make living in Washington. She supposed her own indulgence was just as strange to Yingtai as Yingtai's dramas were to her, but the easy-to-make comfort food was also cheap, and it allowed Joy to experience flavors that she hadn't realized she had missed, living in the village. She put together 2 bowls, setting aside another for Longwei when he returned, setting one in front of Yingtai. "Here you go." Yingtai smiled and reached forward to turn off the television. Regardless of her obsession with dramas, she kept the manners she had been taught in the village, meaning that meal times were family times. "Thank you," Yingtai said in soft English. She had been practicing more since coming to Chengdu, and her skill was increasing. "Thanks, how are your dramas?" "Very nice. Do people really live this way?" Joy chuckled. "Well, let's just say it's an exaggeration in a lot of ways." Yingtai tilted her head. "Exaggeration? Sorry, it means to make big things seem bigger, or little things seem smaller. Make things more than real life." Yingtai nodded and repeated softly to herself, "Exaggeration." Joy was about halfway through her bowl when Longwei came in the door. He was breathing heavily, his face sweaty. "Great news," he said, foregoing any greetings. "I have a lead on the Triads." "Thank God," Joy said, standing and leading him over to the sofa. She got him a cup of water and his bowl of food. "But you need to eat, and tell us what you found while you calm down. You look like you've been running like a madman." Longwei took his bowl thankfully, using his chopsticks like a spoon to shovel the food into his mouth. In almost speed-eating record time, he demolished the large bowl of ground pork, cheap pasta, milk, and cheese powder, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand before setting it down. "I was running," he said, after clearing his mouth with a large swallow of tea. "I had 5 guys on my ass for a while." "What did you do?" Joy asked, after Longwei repeated his words to Yingtai in Chinese. "I decided to take a more direct approach after the past 2 months," Longwei said, giving voice to his frustrations. He had tried a similar approach to Yingtai, finding work in an industry that was traditionally associated with the Triads, but hadn't found success. He could only find day jobs, most of them manual labor that the actual gangsters left to their flunkies to deal with. His pay was skimmed and the Triads' cut taken even before Longwei saw the few crumpled bills that were passed his way on a daily basis. "So I went to a mahjong parlor." Joy shuddered. She knew that all forms of vice, especially gambling, drugs, and prostitution, were heavily controlled by the Triads, and for Longwei to walk directly into one of them was a very direct risk. so I can assume you found some action. Longwei breathlessly chuckled, nodding his head. Yeah, I walked out with over 15,000 yuan. Outside, a few of the Triad thugs who hang out to fleece the winners approached me, and we got into a conversation. I let them lead me back to their place, a go-go bar where they encouraged me to drink and spend money on the girls. Joy suppressed a tremble of anger and jealousy at Longwei spending money on other women, knowing in her mind it was needed to accomplish their mission. So how did you end up running away from them? Well, what these guys didn't know was that I can't get drunk. You can't? No, at least not on regular alcohol. I've found a few back hill brews that can give me a buzz, but you could make a Molotov cocktail out of them. They're so strong. In any case, I had to let loose some of the money, but I maneuvered them into another high-stakes game. I knew it was going to be unfair, but they thought I was already pretty drunk, so it wasn't as rigged as I had worried at first. They also tried to trick me by changing the game to poker, which a lot of Chinese don't know how to play. Thankfully, I learned the game when I was in America. You still haven't told me how you ended up running for your life from 5 triads. When I ended up winning a hand worth another 10,000 yuan, the triads became a lot less friendly. When I scooped up the cash and stuck it in my pocket, I found myself surrounded by the thugs who suddenly wanted to play more. Of course, after changing decks and such, I knocked out 2 of them and took off out the door, running as fast as I could. Do you still have the money? Yingtai asked. Joy gaped at her for a moment, before Yingtai shrugged. Well, I know he wouldn't get hurt. The money would be nice, and we could use it. That's Chinese thinking for you, Longwei joked, easing the tension. And yes, Yingtai, I still have most of the money. I think a little bit drifted out of my pockets during the run, but here, I'll let you count it. Longwei handed Yingtai a large folded wad of bills, easily an inch thick, causing Yingtai to gape in wonder. She had never seen so much money in one place before, and Joy chuckled as the young woman counted the money, which ended up coming to just under 22,000 yuan, or about $3,500. We're rich. Not quite, dear, but we can use it to help the village a lot, Joy replied, watching as Yingtai folded the money up carefully and tucked it into a small cloth bag she was using to keep all of their household finances. Only Joy's weekly paycheck was placed in a bank in order to give a veneer of normalcy to the situation. Taking the bag from Yingtai, she opened it, fishing out a few hundred yuan, handing them over to her. Yingtai, can you do me a favor? What? Can you go out for the evening? I'd like some time with Longwei alone, if it's okay. Yingtai looked from Joy to Longwei, a smile breaking out on her face. She rattled something off in quick village-style Chinese before grabbing her cheap shoulder bag she used as a purse and headed out the door. Joy looked over at Longwei, who shook his head in amusement. Should I ask? Probably not, he said. You'd most likely get embarrassed. Joy flushed, looking at the door. That wasn't exactly what I was thinking about when I asked for privacy, she muttered, before looking back at Longwei. I just didn't want her to see me slap the hell out of you for doing something so stupidly risky. Longwei's face turned from hopeful anticipation to chagrin. Sorry, it's just that I couldn't see any other way to get in where we needed to be. Joy nodded, her shoulder trembling. But you could have been hurt. I could have been hurt many times in my life, especially from the triads. I expected the danger. How do you think I felt when you insisted on manning that bunker in the last attack? Joy curled up against Longwei's side, her mind filled with thoughts about just how dangerous a task they were undertaking. Still, the warm feeling of her lover against her side was calming, and for some reason she felt together they could take on the whole world and conquer it. When Longwei wrapped his arm around her shoulder, rubbing her arm through her t-shirt, she hummed in contentment. That feels nice. Even though you're still mad at me? Joy chuckled, turned, and kissed Longwei on the lips. Maybe not so much mad anymore. Just upset you didn't tell me what you were planning. She climbed into his lap, straddling him and wrapping her arms around his neck. Longwei kissed her again. And what can I do to help you feel less upset? He asked.
Oh no, this adult scene has been taken out and is exclusively available for Romancely Audio Velvet members. Check the description below to sign up and get all the naughty action. The love scene reference is Her Dragon Love, Chapter 3, Love Scene 1.
Thank you, she said, climbing shakily to her feet. She stumbled once, and Longwei held her hand until she was stable again. Let's get a shower, or else Yingtai is going to have too many questions about olive oil when she comes back.
Chapter 4. Joy checked the load in the back of the truck one last time, making sure the tarp was secure. If Longwei's plan worked, they'd have to leave town quickly, and she didn't want to leave anything behind on the highway. There wasn't much. They had decided to do any shopping for the village closer to home, but still they had their bags and a few new clothes. Yingtai in particular had expanded her wardrobe, sporting a whole duffel bag in addition to what she had come with. Joy didn't besmirch the girl any. She hadn't gone wild, and most of the purchases were practical in nature. In fact, the only impractical thing the girl had bought was a satiny red set of lingerie, which she had shown to Joy one time when Longwei was out. "I know most village men will not marry me now, with my hand," she had said, "but I want to still feel beautiful." That matching panties and bra set were now tucked securely under the tarp, along with the other items they had decided to take back to the village. In the glove box was Yingtai's bag of currency, along with some medicines they had bought for her hand. Joy checked everything one last time. They were ready. Longwei's plan was simple. After angering the Triads at the gambling den a week prior, he had started observing the area quietly, following the Triads about to establish their headquarters. Careful not to be caught, it had taken many false starts before he was certain of his target, a nightclub that had 2 supposedly empty floors above it. Parking the truck a few blocks away, Yingtai would sit at the wheel, ready to drive away quickly if necessary, although Joy hoped that wouldn't be necessary. The girl's driving skills were not yet up to par, although she could probably handle easy driving on a highway or other open road. While Yingtai waited, Joy and Longwei would attack the building. It wasn't supposed to be a major raid, just a smash and burn while sending a message, using the Triad's best weapons, intimidation and terror, against them. Using her school's printer, Joy had made a poster that she then copied at a convenience store 200 times, in both English and Mandarin, for them to scatter around the area. The posters read, "Ladies and gentlemen of the Triad, you've eaten well, you've eaten China's wealth, its spirit. But your feast is nearly over. From this moment on, none of you are safe, Black Dragon." Joy didn't think Frank Miller would mind the blatant ripping off of his words. Besides, the Batman reference resonated with her. She and Longwei were going to start a war with this, one against powers that were corrupt and entwined with the government. What better symbol role model was there? Joy knelt down, checking for the 3rd time the closures on her boots. She had gone out soon after her first paycheck, purchasing the expensive combat boots, knowing there would come a time they would be necessary. She wore black denim jeans, along with a blood-red hooded sweatshirt and courier bag that contained her firebombs, glass bottles filled with shaved paraffin wax, lighter fluid, and magnesium powder that would sputter and spit globs of fire everywhere once lit. The paraffin and lighter fluid had been easy, sold in local stores. The magnesium had been more difficult until Yingtai found out that the bicycle factory near her work specialized in magnesium-framed racing cycles. Every day, boxes of magnesium shavings were dumped in the trash, the product of frame making and adjustments. Joy doubted it was pure magnesium, but it burned hot once they got the shavings to light, and it only took a single trip late at night to get away with a box that more than filled their needs. Longwei knelt down beside her, patting her shoulder. "You sure you want to go in there with me?" he asked, his own pack slung over his shoulders. In his hand, he also carried a small automatic pistol, taken from a knocked-out street thug 3 days previously. "We could always start the fire outside the building, you know." Joy shook her head. "While the patrons might be stupid, not everyone in there will be Triad," she said. "They deserve a chance to get out and go home tonight." Longwei smiled and kissed her on the cheek. "That's why I love you so much." Yingtai stuck her head out from the passenger seat of the truck, looking back at them. "You ready?" she asked with her newfound trademark smirk. "Or do you need private time again?" "You know, she's really become a wisecracker," Joy muttered, earning a chuckle from Longwei. "She always has been. She just didn't show it to you until you became closer. Since you're family now, you're getting the full Yingtai." The drive over to the nightclub was quiet. They had chosen to attack just as the sun was setting, before the nightclub got overly busy, in order to maximize the safety of the civilian population. Cruising past the building once, Joy could see a few men gathered around the entrance, most of them obvious gangsters. There were 2 women, most likely either Triad prostitutes or perhaps entertainers, similar to what Joy had done undercover in Hefei. In any case, the area was relatively empty. Joy drove on, finding a parking spot right where she wanted, next to a convenience store. Here, Yingtai could stay parked for a long time without arousing suspicion, as various workers would hang out or even take naps in their cars in the parking lot. "All right, if we're going to do it, now's the time," Joy said, shifting the truck into park. Getting out of the vehicle, she stretched her body quickly, knowing that when she and Longwei ran, there would be no margin for error, and a Charlie horse or a pulled calf could mean dying. "All set?" Longwei checked his bag, nodding. Pulling on a jacket, he slid the straps of his pack over his shoulders, keeping the pistol in his jacket pocket. Handing the keys to Yingtai, they repeated the plan. Yingtai was to wait 15 minutes, then start the engine. If Longwei and Joy hadn't come back within another 10 minutes after that, she was to drive by the nightclub. If she still hadn't seen Longwei or Joy, she was to leave the city, driving at least an hour away before waiting. In the glove box was a disposable cell phone which Longwei or Joy could call her on. If she hadn't heard from them in 24 hours, she was to assume they were dead and drive back to the village. Joy hated that part of the plan, but knew it had to happen. They couldn't leave Yingtai waiting forever. Sticking to the side streets and alleys, Joy and Longwei made their way to the nightclub, coming out across the street. The scene looked similar to when they had driven by before, although one of the two women wasn't outside anymore. Joy knelt down behind a garbage bin, taking a deep breath to calm her nerves. Of course she had been involved in violence. After all, she had fired on armed trucks from a bunker using a machine gun. But she had never taken the fight to someone before, and never with such suicidal odds. Even if the inside of the club had the same number of people as she saw hanging around outside, she and Longwei were outnumbered at least 8 or 9 to 1. And they were going in the front door. Suddenly, a truck pulled up in front of the nightclub, a chubby driver getting out to speak to one of the Triads on guard. They exchanged words for a few moments before the Triad waved over to his right, and the truck driver nodded, climbing back into his cab. "I think we might have a new option," Longwei whispered. "That's a beer delivery truck. I'm betting the daily beer supply just showed up." "That means a loading dock, or at least a service entrance," Joy replied, a smile growing on her face. "Probably won't be as much security around the back." "Let's go," Longwei said, leading them out of the alley and down the street half a block. They crossed over, doubling back and making their way towards the club. Joy had the hood of her sweatshirt up, and her hands pulled deep into her sleeves to try and hide her brown skin, just in case, the two of them darting into the alley leading to the back of the club as the guards' backs were turned. Here she exposed her hands, hoping to play the dumb foreigner card if they were discovered. Thankfully, the narrow alley was deserted, the delivery truck idling about 30 meters down. Darting quickly, they flattened themselves on the far side of the truck, creeping along until they could see into the back of the club. There was one bored security guard watching the beer delivery guy, who was trundling a handcart of beers into the building through a double set of doors. While they couldn't see inside, it looked a lot better than the front door. "Now," Longwei whispered, stepping out from behind the truck and springing towards the guard. Even in his human form, Longwei was startlingly fast, and his flying knee caught the guard under the chin just as he cleared his weapon from his holster, dropping to the concrete without firing a shot. The delivery man whirled, a dark stain spreading on his pants as his bladder let go in fear. "Get out and drive away like everything is just fine," Longwei instructed, as Joy jammed a flyer in the man's hand. She had already placed one in the truck, with a stack tied to the back, rigged to flutter and distribute their contents in the truck's wake as it left. The man nodded, stumbling out the door, Longwei watching him leave. "Get the guard's gun. Let's go." The run through the back of the club was eerily quiet. The nightclub wasn't officially open yet, so there were few people working, and most of the Triads were hanging out upstairs, Joy assumed. Turning a corner, they skidded to a stop in the hallway, which ended in 2 doors. One was marked office, the other staff. "I'll get the office, you get the staff room," Longwei instructed, pulling his first firebomb. Joy followed suit, checking the unfamiliar pistol to make sure it was ready to fire. The large black automatic felt heavy in her hand, thick and ugly. It was clunky, too, obviously meant more for intimidation than actual performance. She wished she had the sleek rifle she had used in the village instead. Joy thought about trying to kick open the door, but realized that even with all of the exercise she had gotten in the village, She wasn't anywhere near strong enough to kick in a door. Instead, she grabbed the handle, jiggling it once to make sure it was unlocked before throwing it open, her pistol leading the way. She had opened the door to the entertainer's dressing room, it seemed. Instead of a room of triads like she had been expecting, she was face to face with a dozen women in various states of dress, all staring at her fearfully. "Any of you speak English?" she yelled, keeping herself close to the doorway. One girl, a redhead with freckles who looked like she may have been British and was wearing only a pair of stockings, raised her hand. "Good. Here's the skinny. You've got about 1 minute before this entire building goes up in flames. I'd grab my things and get the fuck out." Two more girls, who obviously understood the context of what Joy had said, immediately started shoving their things into a bag, yanking on t-shirts and grabbing bags. The other girls followed suit, hurriedly grabbing their things and running out the other end of the room, through a door marked front, and Joy knew her time was running out. Grabbing her first firebomb, she reached for the lighter in her pocket, cursing when the flame didn't start on the first squeeze. Thankfully, 2 more squeezes produced a flame, which she touched to the short rag and wax fuse before she tossed it into a bin that looked like it may have contained dirty laundry or maybe just rags. In either case, the bin soon ignited, flames shooting up the wall and bathing her face in eye-watering heat. She grabbed 2 more firebombs, quickly lighting them before tossing 1 more into the room, followed by fastballing the second through the open door to the front, praying there was something flammable beyond the opening. Backing up, she slammed the door, turning her attention to the door Longwei had gone through. He came out, carrying not just his own kit but another large bag, a sports bag that bulged heavily. "What the hell is that?" "I just robbed the Triad," he replied with a grin. "The poor bastard in there didn't have a chance." "I didn't hear you shoot anyone," Joy said, as they hurried down the hallway. They could hear flames crackle behind them, and screams start to come from the front of the club. The element of surprise was gone. "I didn't," Longwei said. "His back was turned, so I snapped his neck instead. Didn't even leave a firebomb, just a note, if they get the fire out in time." Joy blanched but nodded, knowing that deaths were part of what they were trying to cause. They made their way back out to the small loading area, fishing the last of their firebombs out of their bag. Checking her watch, Joy was surprised at how fast the time had gone. They only had 5 minutes to get out of there, according to their schedule. "We have to boogie." They tossed the unlit bottles around the room, the glass breaking as it shattered against walls and concrete. Finding the last bottle in her hands, Joy lit the fuse before tossing it against the far wall, giving them a little bit of time before the whole damn thing blew up in their faces. "Run!" she yelled, hauling ass down the alleyway. Reaching the street, they could see smoke already billowing out of the front of the club. Instead of running that direction, however, they turned the other way, running further down the alley and away from the club, hoping that the alley would open up somewhere else. Jogging but not sprinting, Longwei in the lead, they rounded a curve, finding a chain-link fence stopping their way. On the other side was a parking garage, it looked like, and the open street beyond that. Joy started climbing the fence, before yelling at the other end of the alley caught her attention. 4 men were running their way, 2 of them holding pistols. "Get over and cover me," Longwei said, pulling his pistol. He dropped to his knee, squeezing off 2 shots that scattered the men to the sides of the alley, finding partial cover in the doorways and against the brick. Joy felt a bullet whiz by her ear at the top of the fence, the whining sound causing her to find an extra bit of push, vaulting her left leg over and dropping to the ground. She pulled her own pistol, turning and laying flat for cover as Longwei tossed over the bag of money he had taken from the Triads, and jumping to catch the top of the fence. One of the Triads stuck his head out to try and fire a shot, but Joy quickly sent him back behind his cover, her rounds puffing off the brick nearby and sending red shards of powder into his face. The next Triad wasn't so lucky, and Joy's shot caught him in the thigh, his screams bouncing off the nearby buildings as he tumbled to the asphalt, grasping his leg. Longwei landed beside her, scooping up the bag as he fired 2 more shots semi-blindly behind him, while Joy got to her feet. "Run!" he yelled, and the 2 of them took off at top speed into the covered darkness of the parking garage. While they heard the Triads try to follow them, the shadows inside the structure helped. Ducking behind a cheap little compact car, Joy took careful aim, putting a round into the chest of the first Triad to attempt climbing the fence, his compatriots pulling his body back as he bled to death. She and Longwei used the time to dart diagonally across the building, vaulting smoothly through a window-like opening and into the street. Dashing across the now busy street, they blended into the crowd, which was still mostly distracted by the smoke now billowing into the sky from 2 blocks away. Slowing from a sprint to a light jog, they wound their way through the streets, Joy depending on Longwei's innate sense of direction to get them back to Yingtai. "How much time do we have left?" Joy asked, finding her watch broken from the rush to get away from the Triads. Longwei pulled out his disposable cell phone, looking at the clock. "Still about 10 minutes," he replied. "Don't worry, I see the street we want right ahead." Longwei turned right at the next intersection, and Joy could also see the convenience store where Yingtai was waiting, the truck engine idling in the cool evening air. Walking quickly, the couple covered the last block safely, waving to Yingtai, who was looking around nervously from the driver's seat. "We're back," Joy greeted her, dropping into the passenger seat while Yingtai maneuvered herself into the back half bench. Longwei slid behind the wheel. "Mission accomplished." Yingtai chattered off a long string of rapid Chinese, so fast that Joy couldn't keep up, and she turned to Longwei, who shifted into reverse and backed out of the space and onto the road. Instead of translating, he rattled off a reply in his own Chinese, the two trading words back and forth as Longwei made his way out of the area and towards the highway. Finally, the conversation petered off and Joy spoke up. "So what was all that?" "Eh?" Longwei said, a surprised look on his face. Chagrin replaced it as he realized what had happened. "Sorry, I was just telling Yingtai about the raid and the bag of money. She asked if she could count it. I said she could when we get on the highway. I have no clue how much it is, but it was a pretty heavy pack." "Why weren't you translating?" Longwei shrugged. "You've done such a great job the time we've been in Chengdu keeping up with Yingtai's comments. I forgot. I guess I didn't realize just how quickly she was speaking. I know you do that to me sometimes. When you get excited, you start talking so quickly that I only catch every other word or so. So what now?" "First, we get the hell out of Chengdu. I know they saw our faces, which I guess we wanted, and those flyers are pretty damning too. Other than stopping for fuel, I don't want to stop until we get back to Wuhan. Although if you're going to go shopping with us, maybe cutting north at Yichang and going through Suizhou instead. The roads from there are smaller, but we can still get to the village in time." "The sun's almost set. Can you get us back safely?" Longwei shook his head. "No, but I'm good for the next few hours, maybe until we're at least to Guanggang, or maybe even until we have to change over to the G50 and head towards Enshi. We'll have to stop for fuel before then. If you can try and get some sleep before that, it'll help. I don't think Yingtai's ready for nighttime driving." Joy glanced back where the girl was busily counting bills and nodded. She wasn't sure just how much sleep she could get. She had, within the past hour, torched a Triad nightclub, shot at least 2 men, and been shot at herself. There was enough adrenaline running through her system she thought she'd be up for days. But Longwei was right. The best plan right now was to put as many kilometers between themselves and the attack as possible. "Okay, I'll lean back and try to close my eyes." Finding the seat adjustment lever, Joy canted her seat back, pulling the hood of her sweatshirt up over her head to shade her from the street lamps, and closed her eyes. Despite her concerns, within 10 minutes she was snoring softly, the only other sounds being Longwei's humming to himself, while Yingtai muttered to herself as she counted out the money.
Chapter 5. I can only assume that the incident in Chengdu last night was your work? Joy rubbed at her eyes. She had driven for another 4 hours after Longwei woke her around midnight, getting into the city of Xinyang just before 5 in the morning. Pulling into a rest stop, she had made sure the doors were locked before dropping back off to sleep, only to be woken what felt like far too early by the ringing of her normal cell phone. Nobody had called the number in the entire time she had been in Chengdu, and it startled her. "Good morning to you too, Billy. If you don't mind, keep your voice down because I'm going off about 3 hours sleep right now." "I'm not surprised. If what the bloggers on Weibo are saying is correct, you stirred up quite a ruckus." Joy yawned, the impact of her actions still blunted by the exhaustion she was feeling. While she had gotten 7 hours of sleep last night, it was split into 2 blocks, with 4 hours of driving in between. Still, her old reporter instincts were kicking in, and she felt hungry for information. "What's Weibo saying? And how'd you guess it was me?" "Well, the building went up like a torch. Whatever it was you used was good. The fire department is claiming only one death, although Weibo is saying at least a dozen, all of them triads. Black Dragon's a pretty easy name to guess knowing your situation, by the way. You didn't get the heads of the Chengdu triad, but you bit them pretty hard." "Should I ask you as a minister if you should be trying to take lives?" "Not now, Billy. I made a decision and I'll discuss it with the man upstairs when the time comes, I'm sure. As for now, I need your friendship and your connections."
"This is a lot different than when you were asking for help to write some newspaper stories," Billy seethed over the phone. "Men are dying. 2 of them shot, 1 with a broken neck. Weibo's blowing up about a truck driver babbling on about Black Dragon. And by the way, they've already tracked down that Frank Miller misquote. You think you're Batgirl or something?"
"No, Billy, but we're playing for higher stakes than ever now," Joy replied, getting out of the truck and into the cool morning air. She could feel her voice rising, and she didn't want to disturb Longwei or Yingtai, who were both still sleeping inside. The rest stop was deserted, a thin fog drifting along the ground. They attacked the village first. We defended ourselves, and yes, men died then too. Billy, I'm going to be honest with you. Between these 2 attacks, I've shot 5 men, although I didn't know I had killed the last 2. We attacked Chengdu to protect the village and get the triads focused somewhere other than the village itself. Maybe, but my sources are telling me that the triad heads in Hong Kong are going in another direction. Which is?
They're waiting for some central government cooperation, but as soon as Beijing gives the go-ahead, they're going to wipe the village off the map. I'm talking every man, every woman, every child, and the village plowed under.
Joy felt the blood rush out of her face and gorge rise in her throat. What had she done? "How long do we have?"
Best guess? 2, at most 3 weeks. The Beijing government wants to make sure there are no major incidents right now. President Xi is in negotiations with the UK on a new trade deal, and he'll want everything looking good for at least that long. After that, though, it'll be time for the next round of pissing off the Japanese and Koreans, and he can use the Dayu dispute to distract the people as perfect cover for the operation.
Will the triads have governmental support? Maybe, but most likely not, Billy said. You didn't attack a governmental facility, so while they may want you out of the way, all it takes is one photo uploaded to the web to give him a major headache. Thanks, Billy. Let me talk this over with Longwei. Can I give you a call later?
Sure. I'm still pretty safe. The triads know I haven't been seen with you in months. As long as I'm still seen over here in Shanghai, I'm in the clear.
Okay, I'll call you later then. And Billy?
Yeah?
Thanks, Joy said honestly, blinking her eyes as she watched a stray cat run across the parking lot. You're a good friend. You too, Joy, later. The phone went dead, and Joy looked around. 2 weeks. What the hell were they supposed to accomplish in only 2 weeks? Joy felt a sense of déjà vu as everyone gathered into the temple grounds. The entire village had been surprised when Longwei, Yingtai, and herself had arrived back in the village with 3 vehicles. The original pickup truck, along with 2 minibuses that could hold 20 or 30 people. The warm welcome was peppered with questions, which Longwei dismissed by saying only that everyone would have to meet at the temple at sundown in order to discuss the situation. Yingtai had promised to keep her mouth shut at least that long, staying on the temple grounds after greeting her family. Joy watched her and realized she had changed during the months in Chengdu. She was still the village girl she had been before, but not as simple, and quite a few of her friends were looking at her with perplexed glances. Joy only hoped their relationships could be mended. When the sun touched the western horizon, the people started arriving, so that by the time full darkness descended, the village population was gathered in the courtyard. Joy sat next to a stone pillar, looking at the gathering. She had missed these people, and Longwei's news weighed heavily on her heart. Longwei's speech was short and somber. The villagers took it with what Joy thought was a remarkable calmness, most of them nodding as if to say it was expected, and all right, before heading back to their houses for the evening. When it was just the 2 of them, they sat on the stone steps, watching the torches sputter in the soft breeze. They took it well. They still think I have some sort of magic power to protect them, he replied, considering that we did it once, then took the fight to the triads and walked away with none of us hurt. They think we have some sort of power.
I'm not sure what I can do to change their minds on that. Maybe we can, Joy replied. After all, Billy is coming tomorrow, and he said he might have a few people with him. Maybe he'll have information as well. When Billy pulled up the next day, Joy wasn't sure if she was happy or sad. While it was great to see her friend again after so long, the circumstances surrounding his arrival were perhaps the worst they could be, and she wasn't sure if this was a reunion or a farewell. "How are you, Billy?" "I've been better, but I bring good news," Billy said. He hugged her quickly, before shaking hands with Longwei. "How are you doing, Longwei? I know we haven't really had a chance to talk much." "It's good to see you," Longwei replied. "I apologize if this has given you any trouble." "That's a minister's job, isn't it?" Billy said with a smile. "Even if we don't share the same religion, my Lord teaches me to help others all the time." Longwei nodded his head in thanks, leading Billy inside. "You said you had good news. I do hope you don't mean you want to try and convert everyone to Christianity before the Triad attacks." Billy laughed at Longwei's play on words, the joke hitting home. "While the gospel does mean good news, actually I had some guidance from earlier in the Bible," Billy said. "Just after Joy called, I got in contact with one of my parishioners, a man whose wealth is actually quite great. He doesn't let it be known he's a Christian, of course, but he has connections. In any case, he and I talked, and I may have a way to save a lot of your village. It'll be dangerous, but it can be done." "What do you propose?" Joy asked. "Because I don't think you intend to give us a ranger battalion." Billy shook his head. "While there is a time for war, and a time to stand and fight, there is also a time to retreat tactically. I know of another village, a product of Chairman Mao's Great Leap Forward, which was established back in the late 1950s. The place was supposed to be an agricultural communist paradise, filled with the disenfranchised and other things. It was a total flop, and by the time Mao died it was abandoned. For the past 40 years, the entire village has sat empty. "So, what can we do with a site that's been abandoned for 40 years? Joy asked, perplexed. Billy pulled out a map of China, a red dot marked northwest of Chengdu. "The thing is, I was actually there 2 years ago. It's in Qinghai province, west of the mountains, and the nearest city of any note is over 200 kilometers away. The buildings are still in good condition, actually, built of concrete and steel, most of them still standing. While the windows have been broken by the elements over time, the fields are still relatively free of trees, and the area could be revamped into an actual working village quickly." "And how do you propose doing that? After all, this place failed the first time." "It failed because the Communist Party filled the village with a bunch of city dwellers from Shanghai and Beijing. Of course they starved. They didn't have the first clue on how to farm. But the people here have been workers of the land for generations. You've probably got farmers here who have forgotten more about farming than a professor of agricultural science. I'm telling you, if you can get your people there, you will be safe from the Triads for as long as you want. But that's not the best part. You need to get to it, because from what I see, you're asking us to move a village of 1,000 people close to 3,000 kilometers one way in only 2 weeks. You don't happen to have a favor with your Jesus, do you?" Longwei asked, his face stony. Billy waved off the insult. "Longwei, I'm trying to help you. I see you already had a similar idea to me, although those 2 buses aren't going to make any real difference. To get these people and their things moved, you're going to need heavy lifting capacity. My parishioner happens to have that." "What do you mean?" "I mean, the man I'm talking about is a general in the National Defense Reserve Forces. He's in charge of a whole district near Shanghai and controls over 5,000 troops, including 3 transportation battalions, one of which has helicopters." Joy shook his head. "Billy, how can we trust a member of the army? They'd rat us out to the central government and the Triads before we even left Anhui province." 3 reasons. First, never underestimate the ability of a bureaucracy to lose its information and obscure orders. This man's done things for me before, usually on the scale of getting black market items or smuggling people out of China. Second, he's been able to form a core of supporters in his command who are with him. When I mentioned the issue, he actually offered not just transportation, but actual help from some of his troops. Finally, he hates the Triads and the corrupt parts of the central government even more than you do. Triads killed his wife and baby son years ago just to intimidate him, and he's worked against them ever since. Longwei and Joy looked at each other, then at Billy. Longwei nodded,
a smile forming on his lips for the first time since Billy got out of his van. Let's talk some more. Maybe an exodus is what is called for. Their hasty plan was simple, and Joy knew it hinged on a lot of things going right. Billy would contact his friend the General, who would forge the orders for one of his transportation and construction battalions to move the village, for cultural preservation reasons. The orders would appear as if they came from state security, and few had the nerve to question an order from the division that made dissidents disappear in the middle of the night. Before that, Billy would lead an advance party of villagers to the new site, using the 2 buses Longwei and Joy had purchased with the stolen Triad money. In the end, Yingtai had counted out over 1,000,000 yuan, and they still had plenty left over even with the buses. Billy was to take the money and arrange the purchasing of supplies to get the village through their first year at the new site, while fields were being planted and new crops grown. While it pains me, I'll also see what I can do about getting weapons. I can think of a few names to call. Whatever you do, you must be back in 3 days, Longwei said. It's a 5,000-kilometer round trip, and we might be able to get a second load of villagers out via bus if you go quickly. Of course, Billy said. In fact, I'm going to be on the phone as soon as I get into range on the way back. They were sitting in the temple courtyard, eating a quick lunch. Billy had been typing into a tablet computer almost non-stop, saving the data and ideas for later, to upload emails and information as soon as he had a chance. He tapped the screen one more time, setting it aside. There. All the emails I need are composed and waiting for a data connection, which I can get 15 minutes after I leave the village. Just then, Yingtai came in, carrying a tray with bowls of rice on it. The young woman's presence galvanized Billy, whose voice trailed off. Joy smirked. Billy? Earth to Billy Chin? You still with us? Yeah, Billy said, a red blush coming to his cheeks as Yingtai sat down, passing out the bowls of rice. Sorry. Billy, this is Yingtai, who has adopted me as her sister. Yingtai, this is Billy Chin, my friend from Shanghai. The two exchanged greetings, before Yingtai turned to Joy, her chopsticks poised in her hand. He's cute, she said in village Chinese, causing Joy to chuckle. Is he single? Yes, Joy said, laughing as Billy's eyes went from one woman to another, desperate to understand what was being said. From the way he looked at you when you came in, I'd say he thinks the same about you. Okay, I caught part of that, Billy said. But what do you mean he thinks the same about what? Joy and Longwei laughed. Longwei translating Billy's English into village Chinese for Yingtai, who smiled mysteriously. After lunch, Billy, how about you rest a little bit? Joy said, playing matchmaker. Longwei and I need to discuss some things with the village, and I'm sure Yingtai would enjoy taking you around to see everything you missed the first time. Billy tried to hide the grin that lit up his face, and mostly succeeded, the lift at the corners of his eyes betraying his excitement. Okay, if I leave by 3 o'clock, I'm sure I can get back to at least Nanjing, which I can use as my base of operations for a few days. After lunch, Longwei watched Billy and Yingtai walk through the stone archway of the main gate, an amused look on his face. Do you think he'll understand what she says? It doesn't matter, Joy replied. I've seen that look before. Oh, where? On my own face after getting to know you. Longwei chuckled, nodding. Now that you mention it, I think I've seen it as well, in my own mirror a few months ago. But your plan isn't all deception. We have a lot of work to do and only a few days to do it. The words proved to be a vast understatement. Even by the time Billy left a few hours later, stars still in his eyes, Yingtai had smiled at him and held his hand when he went to get in his truck. There was already a vortex of activity swirling around the village. The school shut down, the children hurriedly retasked to packing up the things in the building before working as a group to assist throughout the village, packing and sorting things that could be taken and things that had to be left behind. Joy knew that regardless of how many trucks Billy's friend got them, or how many troops to assist, there was no way they could take everything from the village. It was just too much. Deciding to lead by example, she went through her things, carrying everything except the bare necessities out into the road in front of the temple, forming a large pile. It pained her to see so many of her clothes and other things in the pile, but she knew she had to make an image for the people. Her actions caused a stir in the passers-by, who spread through word of mouth what Joy was doing to every house. By the time the sun went down, someone from almost every house in the village was there, watching her as she dumped the last of her things onto the ground. "I wish we could take everything," Joy said, looking around at the assembled few hundred. "I wish we didn't have to fight. But more than that, I wish to live in a world free of the threat from the Triads, where I can live and be happy with you, my new friends and family. So I'm giving these up." Walking over to one of the lamps at the gate of the temple, she lit a stick, making a makeshift torch, which she touched to the pile of goods. Most of her clothes were light and cottony, the small pile soon blazing and lighting up the group. "I don't need these things to be happy or safe. What do you not need?" The stunned villagers watched for a moment before an understanding murmur passed from person to person. Joy watched as nods joined the voices, and the crowd broke up, quietly going into the night. She knew they understood her message, and that the next few days she'd see more fires. "You didn't have to burn your Georgetown t-shirt," Longwei said quietly behind her. Surprised, she turned, seeing him leaning against the stone pillars of the gate, his arms crossed over his chest. It was still a good shirt. "Maybe, but I have another," she replied, "and I can use the space for something more thermal. We're going to need it. Billy said winters there are brutal." "I see. Well, I'm going to do a patrol of the hills surrounding the village in dragon form. I think it'll take about an hour. Would you like to wait up for me or catch some sleep?" Joy shook her head. "I'm still on Chengdu time. I'm not ready to sleep yet. I'll wait up for you. Maybe catch up on some reading. Billy brought me a 2 GB data card filled with ebooks, so I should check out what's on it. But if you don't mind, I want to see you change form. That's always so cool to watch." "Of course, but in the courtyard. I don't strip naked in front of the villagers unless I need to." "Maybe I can strip for you tonight instead," Joy teased. "If you get back in time, maybe I will do more." Longwei grinned, kissing her quickly before stepping back. "Before I change my mind," he explained, stripping off his shirt and pants. As soon as he could, he started to change, the rippling pops and creaks of his body rearranging itself fascinating Joy like it always did. She only wished she had been able to look at him naked in the lamplight a bit longer, but consoled herself with the promise that later she'd get to do a lot more. Once Longwei was in his full dragon form, she looked up at him, the frills of his beard still a foot over her head, his eyes still full of the intelligence and warmth she knew from the human form of her lover. With a toss of his head, he headed out the main gate, leaving Joy behind in the red lamplight. Looking up at the moon in the sky, Joy offered up a quick prayer to whatever higher powers may be watching over them, and headed inside.
Chapter 6. Joy was waiting for Longwei when he came back from his patrol.
Oh no, this adult scene has been taken out and is exclusively available for Romancely Audio Velvet members. Check the description below to sign up and get all the naughty action. The love scene reference is Her Dragon Love, Chapter 6, Love Scene 2.
Longwei smiled and pulled her on top of him for another kiss. "Give me a few minutes," he said in between kisses. "Even us dragon men need at least that much time to recover." Billy was true to his word, arriving back in the village exactly 3 days after he left. What surprised Joy, however, was the line of 20 trucks that followed him, ranging from small 2-person mini pickups to full-sized SUVs. There was even a small panel truck, the type Joy thought of as belonging to U-Haul. "What's all this?" Joy asked him, as he waved the driver of the next truck around. The ad hoc caravan circled, trying to find space on the narrow dirt road to turn around. "This is both the first part of your help and the price of helping you." "What do you mean?" Longwei said, emerging from inside the temple to shield his eyes from the thrown-up dust. "These people are not soldiers." "No, they're Christians," Billy said as the engine started to shut down. A motley collection of people, ranging from young couples to what looked like one old man who had to be pushing 80, emerged from the vehicles. Joy even saw 2 children, a boy and a girl of about 5 years old, who looked like twins. As you know, the central government has been shutting down a lot of churches recently. Well, these people are tired of their persecution just as you are tired of yours. So when word of what I was doing spread through the Christian community, they got in contact with me. "What are they asking for?" Billy held up his hands for peace and patience. "Hold on, I'm getting to it. These people represent a larger group of about 200 who are willing to give up everything they have to join you. Now, most of them are city dwellers, so you'll have to teach them farming ways and such, but they have a variety of skills otherwise. There's a teacher, 2 plumbers, a veterinarian, and even an electrician to go along with your average worker. All of them have skills, and all of them had access to trucks that could help make the journey. What they ask is simple. They help the first group of villagers, the leading element we discussed, load up and go to the village. Now they don't know where we're going, and I told them they won't find out until we're closer to there, to protect all of us. But they want it to be a one-way ticket. They join up totally. I explained to them the way the village runs, and they're cool with that, with one request. Which is? Longwei grumbled, looking around nervously. There were more and more outsiders getting involved, and Joy could see he wasn't sure he could trust all of these people. With the Triad coming in just over a week, not trusting people was a double-edged sword. The village needed their skills and resources, but one person selling them out would be the death of them all. Religious freedom, Billy said, as if it were obvious. We don't care what the villagers believe, and to be honest, I don't understand it all myself. I'm not sure if they are your normal Chinese semi-Confucian, semi-atheistic, semi-superstitious bunch, or if they actually worship you as some sort of demi-divine leader, or what. I don't really care either. I trust Joy, and if she loves you and is willing to do all that you've been up to the past few months, then I trust you too. All I'm asking is to let these people have their own freedom to worship as they see fit. On one condition, Longwei said, his eyes fixed on Billy's. You join us too. I do not know these people, and I do not have time before the winter comes to integrate another 100 people into the village, including the communications problems, and protect us from the Triads. I need someone who will lead them, who trusts them. You've brought them this far out of the cities. You must lead them to their new life as well. Billy looked around, his face pondering. For 2 minutes he looked at the scared collection of city dwellers who were being approached by villagers who walked up cautiously. Even the little boy and girl were being approached by a few of the village children who didn't know what to make of the girl's Hello Kitty knockoff t-shirt or the boy's Pokemon hat. Joy was sure the villagers looked just as strange to the Christians, with their drab, plain clothing, strange accents, and dirt-streaked faces. You've got a deal, Billy finally said, smiling and reaching out to shake Longwei's hand. The 2 men sealed the agreement with a handshake, and from the corner of her eye, Joy saw Yingtai approach. She had been helping the doctor that morning, packing up his equipment for the move. I think someone else wants to say hello, Joy said, nodding in Yingtai's direction. Billy turned, his eyes lighting up and his smile growing at seeing the young woman. The 2 came together, stopping about a foot apart while Billy tried his best to express a greeting in village-style Chinese. He kept stuttering, however, and finally Yingtai laughed, reaching out to hold his hands again, and smiling. Do you think we should tell him about our engagement? Longwei whispered in her ear. After all, he is a minister. After the move, Joy replied. I don't need the blessing of the church on our engagement. You do have a ceremony in the village for marriages, right? Normally, I play the role of master of ceremonies, Longwei whispered back. But yes, there is a village tradition. I'll tell you about it later. The work was hard, but the new people quickly lent as much of a hand as they could. Joy was surprised to find the old man, who she learned was an agricultural scientist, was one of the hardest workers. I lived through Mao, I lived through persecution after persecution. This is nothing, he told her in his Australian-accented English. Joy found out later the man had worked for 15 years in the University of Sydney as a teacher. The biggest factor in loading up the trucks was deciding who and what would go. Most important to the villagers, which surprised a lot of the city dwellers, was their farming implements. The U-Haul-style truck was filled with lots of hand tools, along with bags of seeds that Joy knew were going to be vital for the next year's crops. Rice and buckwheat were going to be especially important, although Joy thought there might also be a lot of hunting and other things going on as well. Thankfully, Billy had secured plenty of other food supplies, which they would pick up along the way. The next step was to decide who would go in the advance party. There were 2 camps of thought on the issue, and Longwei felt split. Part of the village thought that the elder villagers and the children should go in the advance party in order to minimize the stress on their bodies and to keep most of the villagers who could fight in any way with the main body to help if the army didn't come through. On the other hand, another camp felt that if there was a chance of the army not coming through, it would be best to keep as much of the village's strength in the new location, preparing and securing their new home while letting the army handle the movement of the others. It was a hotly debated issue, with arguments on both sides. In the end, Longwei decided to go with a third option, combining elements of both plans. The children, along with a core group of adults, would be sent ahead with the Christians, under Billy's lead, to set up and get the village ready. In this way, the future of the village would hopefully be preserved, while still keeping those who could not fight out of harm's way as much as possible. For the next 2 days, Joy worked from sunup to sundown, loading and packing the vehicles the Christians had brought, and helping the remaining houses and items be arranged when the army arrived. If the general Billy knew was true to his word, he'd be arriving in 3 days, which left them just 4 days to pack the entire village and roll out before the Triads arrived. At the end of the second day, Joy was lying on the wooden walkway surrounding the temple, exhausted. The sun had just gone down, and she counted herself lucky to have even been able to stagger back from the school, where she had helped finish packing all of the school materials into the back of 2 of the pickup trucks. Hearing footsteps on the gravel path leading to the building, she turned her head to see Billy approaching. "Hey, Billy, sorry if I don't get up. I'm not sure I can walk right now." Billy looked almost as tired as she was. In many ways, she was impressed. Back in Shanghai, Billy was always more of a talker, and while never lazy, didn't get involved with physical labor as much as organization and management. He could pound away at a keyboard or speak in front of a crowd like a champ, but she had never seen him swing a hammer or turn a wrench before. Since coming back to the village and accepting Longwei's offer, however, Billy was as tireless a worker as anyone else. He helped pack clothing into bags or carry tools into trucks. He had even helped with preparing the community meals, which had started to replace the individual family cooking in order to save time and resources. Joy had laughed as Billy was chased off by Ying Tai, who told him he wasn't ready to cook the rice yet. "I understand," he groaned, easing himself down onto the ground. "I just wanted to say we'll be heading out around midnight in order to minimize the change of Triad observation. Longwei did a patrol, and while he didn't see anything directly, there were signs we've been under surveillance. He's actually asked 2 men to go up to some of the old observation points you established for the last attack to keep watch on the road." "And how are they going to get a message back?" Joy asked. "The sun is down, the light signals won't work." "Actually, that was some of the stuff I wanted to show you. We're packing it up to take it to the new village, and I wanted you to see it first. Sorry, I was going to show you earlier, but we kept going in different directions. I showed Longwei earlier, and he thought it was pretty cool." "Oh?" Joy asked, sitting up and paying attention. Longwei, while warming to Billy's help after watching him work so hard for the past few days, was not one to be impressed easily. "I guess I need to see then. Give me a hand up, though. I'm so stiff right now I think all I can do is roll back and forth." With a grunt of effort on both sides, Billy helped her to her feet, and they walked out to the street. Billy's truck was parked in front of the temple, most of the back filled with materials. There was a big gap, though, and next to the bed of the truck, a wooden crate sat, the top off. "Here you are," Billy replied, waving her over. Inside was an assortment of electronic items and a rolled-up tube that looked like some sort of tarp. Joy could identify some of the parts, but not all of them. "What is all this?" she said, afraid to poke around too much so as not to break something. "Well, most of it is communications equipment of various types. In addition to the scrambled walkie-talkies, which your guys on the mountain have, there's a long-range, dual-band radio and a satellite link-up that can do both voice and data transmission. Best of all, that thing that looks like a roll of cloth is actually a solar panel, the product of new flexible solar technology. Unrolled, that becomes a 10-square-meter solar collector, which can produce enough power on a good day to power not just the satellite link-up, but trickle-charge your computers as well. If you jack it into a normal car battery array, you can power a desktop computer for 2 hours a day off of this, when the sun is out, of course." "Of course," Joy said, impressed. "How much did all of this run?" "Nothing," Billy replied. "A lot of it is surplus items, produced by an electronics firm that supports our cause. The solar panel is actually a beta test product, and officially we're only product testing the device. Of course, we get to keep it after product testing, although we've been politely asked to send in feedback to the manufacturer, via email at least." Joy shook her head. "Billy, you went into the wrong line of work." "Oh, why's that?" "Because you're a much better supply and acquisition man than anyone I've ever met. Seriously, this straight-up old-style American military work. Next you'll tell me that the satellite link-up comes with free internet. But of course, Billy said with a smile. Encrypted and outside China's firewall at that. It's good to have connections. Joy nodded and patted him on the shoulder. I'm impressed, Billy, but go get some sleep. If you're leaving at midnight, you need to get some rest. Who are you taking with you? Billy blushed slightly before answering. Yingtai and one of her friends. Yingtai will be my backup driver now that you guys taught her how to drive. Joy smiled and patted Billy on the shoulder. That's great, Billy. Don't be embarrassed. She's a great girl, and she likes you too. Billy's mouth opened and closed a few times as he searched for the words to say. Finally, he gave up, nodded his thanks, and headed to the doctor's office where some temporary beds were set up. Joy looked up at the sky, whispering her thanks to whatever was looking over them, before turning to help the two men who were loading the crate into the back of Billy's truck. She could still get some sleep tonight, after the caravan was ready to go. Joy woke up to the sound of horrible electronic squealing. Rolling out of her bed, she blinked twice in the semi-darkness before her mind registered that Longwei wasn't in bed with her, but was holding one of the walkie-talkies Billy had left behind. There was 8 radios in total, one at each lookout location, one for Longwei to use, one for the caravan, and 2 spares that were packed in Billy's truck. Now Longwei's was squawking, although Joy couldn't understand what was being said. "What is it?" she asked, pulling her t-shirt over her head. She had slept in pants, being so tired, but had at least taken her shirt off. Longwei held up his hand, silencing her questions, before replying into the walkie-talkie. "How many? How far back? I understand. I will assist." "What's going on?" Joy asked again as the radio went silent. Longwei scrambled to his feet and started to take off his clothes. "Triads have attacked the caravan, about 15 kilometers outside the village," Longwei replied. "I'm going to assist them in getting away." "Not without me, you aren't," Joy said, heading for the closet where the assault rifles were stored. "2 are better than 1 here." Longwei looked at her levelly before nodding, pulling his pants off. Joy grabbed the Kalashnikov from the closet, along with the 3 spare magazines in a harness they had salvaged from the last attack. Turning, she saw Longwei nude, ready to transform. He had a set of goggles in his hand, ones that the villagers normally used when they were working in dangerous or dusty conditions. "Put these on," he said, tossing them to her. "I'm going to be going pretty fast, and if you want to keep your eyesight, you'll need protection. And grab the radio, you can talk with Billy while we go."
Chapter 7. When Longwei had said fast, Joy had no idea what he meant. As she held on, her legs on his shoulders while her left hand held on to a rope around his neck, she got a clue. They had to be going at least 150 kilometers an hour, cross-country, and Joy was glad for the goggles Longwei had given her. The Kalashnikov was in her right hand, the strap wrapped around her forearm to prevent dropping, while the radio was clipped to the shoulder straps of her harness, Billy's voice calling out updates as they sped over the hills and towards the attack. The chase had devolved from an ambush to a gun battle pursuit, with the Triad using motorcycles to pursue the convoy. Already 1 truck had been destroyed, although Billy wasn't sure who it had been. Joy's heart ached at the idea, knowing that most likely whoever had been inside was already dead. "Faster!" Joy screamed into the wind, hoping Longwei could hear her. Thankfully, her mental connection to Longwei was stronger than ever. Billy's reporting 1 vehicle down, and 6 motorcycles attacking the rest of the convoy, she thought. He's worried, because nobody in the convoy is trained for this sort of stuff. "Neither are we," Longwei replied. "But I doubt the Triads are ready for us. You better be right, although this is pretty damn cool. Forget bear cavalry, we've got dragon cavalry." Joy was surprised at the feeling she had. While she was understandably angry and frightened, there was a passionate high running through her veins, a mental connection to the old warriors of her bloodline, who knew the joy of battle. A lustful cry ripped from her throat, and she could feel Longwei reciprocate, his dragon roar echoing through the hills. When the radio squawked again, Billy asked them just what the hell that sound was, and that 2 of the Triad cycles had started to fall back at the sound, causing Joy to laugh. Coming over the last ridge separating them from the road, Joy could see the lights of the caravan, with the motorcycles darting among them, 2 kilometers distant. Longwei had brought them out in front of the group to sweep in from the front, hoping to catch the enemy by surprise. "Hold on, Billy!" Joy screamed into her radio, hoping the words were legible. "Shit's about to get real,"
Longwei leapt the last few meters from the ridgeline to the roadway, landing with only a mild thump, and Joy was hardly jostled at all. Clamping her thighs as tight as she could on his shoulders, she pulled the rifle to her shoulder, using her left hand as best she could to support and steady the barrel. The first cycle, almost parallel to Billy's front truck, had two riders, the rear rider holding what looked like an Uzi pistol. Longwei and Joy's simultaneous war cry ripped through the night, and in a flash, Longwei caught the cycle flush with his chest, the cycle and both riders bouncing off his body to fly into the night. Joy was jostled but held on, her eyes searching for the next attacker. This one was on the other side of the road, with both riders trying to slide behind one of the convoy trucks. The minibus Longwei had driven back to the village, packed with 30 of the village's children. The driver, a former trucker from Hong Kong, held the steering wheel in a white-knuckled grip, his eyes seeing Longwei and Joy. He edged to his left, narrowing the gap and forcing the motorcycle in front. As soon as there was a clear shot, Joy squeezed the trigger, aiming for the cycle's front wheel since she didn't know anything about leading a target. The narrow distance helped, and the bullets caught the rider in the leg before blasting into the engine. The driver spun out, both of them disappearing under the bus in a screeching crunch of metal, and Joy could only hope the children didn't see the carnage. With only 4 cycles left, the Triad attackers grew more cautious, ignoring the caravan for a chance to attack Longwei directly. The next 2 worked together, one on a normal cycle, while the other attacked on a cycle with a sidecar, the gunner more stable and using a shotgun. Longwei was able to avoid the shots, emerging from the far side of the caravan to catch one of the trailing cycles broadside before whirling. While the whole thing had taken less than 10 seconds, to Joy, it felt like everything was moving in slow motion as Longwei turned and took off, coming up on the back of the caravan. The first cyclist's gunner fired wildly over his shoulder, his Uzi spraying shots all over the road. Most of them flew off into the night harmlessly, but one lucky shot tore creased Joy's right cheek, catching the bottom of her ear. Joy screamed, and only held on to her Kalashnikov due to the strap being wrapped around her arm. "Joy!" Longwei thought, slowing slightly. Joy shook her head, gritting her teeth against the pain. "Go! Go! I'm all right!" she called back, pulling the rifle back up to her shoulder. "We'll treat the wound later." Longwei bore down on the cyclist again, and Joy felt a sense of icy calm drop over her. She didn't know if it was shock or instinct, but all her fear and rage dropped away, leaving a cold center that sighted carefully down the barrel. From this position, there was no problem of lateral deflection, no problems of hitting a busload of children. The rearmost truck of the caravan only held farming tools and seed. The motorcycle had shut off its lights in an attempt to hide, but the running lights of the truck gave Joy enough of an outline to center on the gunman's back. Releasing half a breath, she caressed the Kalashnikov's trigger, the burst catching the gunman in the back and neck. The sudden shift in weight caused the driver to lose control, tumbling to the pavement only to be run over by Longwei's body. Joy could feel Longwei hiss in pain as his scales went over the red-hot engine and hoped the burn wasn't too bad. Drifting back in the darkness was 2 more cycles. One of them was the cycle with a sidecar, while the other had only a single rider. The single rider took his machine pistol and emptied it into the truck next to him, spraying the cabin with bullets and shrapnel. Whoever was the passenger was dead within an instant, although by some miracle the driver kept control and kept the truck on the road. Empty, the driver paused to reload. Joy dropped her magazine, not caring that it was lost to the night, slapping a fresh full magazine in and slapping around home. With a quick flick of her thumb, Joy shifted the rifle to full automatic mode, sighting the sidecar cycle, knowing she had a moment before the other rider could reload his pistol. The icy coldness dropped over her again, and a flash of old memory from some movie flashed through her mind. She aimed low, anticipating the rifle barrel would rise, and squeezed the trigger. The stream of rounds caught the sidecar cycle in a sweeping diagonal, stitching across the gunner before catching the driver in the right shoulder and arm, spinning him off into the dirt. Longwei closed on the other cyclist and swept him aside with a flick of his tail, sending him screaming off into the night before crashing into trees or shrubbery. The last cyclist, seeing his compatriots destroyed, dropped back, clamping on his brakes and dropping back, turning and fleeing before Longwei and Joy could attack again. Longwei pulled to the front of the convoy, leading them for another 5 kilometers before slowing down, calling them to a halt. Joy hopped off, and Longwei changed to his human form, both of them running over to Billy's truck. He had put the vehicle in park, but the engine stayed running. Other than a few bullet holes in the side panels, everything looked okay to them. "I need an update on everyone, quickly," Longwei said, as the 3 of them started off down the now shortened caravan of 21 vehicles, the 20 that Billy had brought along with the 2 buses Longwei and Joy had bought. Coming to the next truck, Joy saw that nobody was injured, and she moved on, running from truck to truck. Most of the injuries were minor, although there were a few bullet wounds that were already getting treatment. At the third-to-last truck, she stopped, the horror of the scene piercing the cold veil that had dropped over her emotions. The driver of the truck, one of the Christians, was holding a child in his lap, his tear-streaked face screaming his pain into the night. Joy could see it was one of the 2 Christian children, the little girl who Joy had learned was named I. She hadn't been hit by a bullet, but instead a shard of glass. The other passenger, who Joy thought was her mother, had tried to protect her daughter as the last murderous spray of bullets from the single rider had torn her apart. A single shard of glass had gotten through, though, slicing her jugular vein even as her father tried to keep the truck on the road, her lifeblood spraying the inside of the cab and painting it blackish red. Now the father held his precious daughter, whose faint struggles stopped and her body relaxed in death even as Joy arrived. She stood, unsure what to do, as Longwei and Billy arrived, Billy kneeling to console the man as best he could. Others arrived, carrying the bodies to another truck, while the father was led to one of the buses. There was no time for mourning. The convoy had to move on. Billy and Longwei conferred in the darkness, Billy nodding sadly. Joy helped wipe up what blood she could from the cab, while another Christian took over driving duties. The truck carried needed food and supplies. It couldn't be abandoned. In less than 5 minutes, the whole thing was done. Billy called all the drivers together and was back on the road towards the new village. Tomorrow, in daylight, they would find time to evaluate the damage and to start the mourning. "Is there anything else we could have done?" Joy asked Longwei as they watched the convoy disappear into the night. "No," Longwei replied, "but we have to get back. If they would attack the convoy, they could attack the village. I only pray that the army gets here before that." The next day, the mood in the village was somber as news of the attack spread. The few Christians left mourned at the loss of their friends, while the villagers settled into grim determination to get things ready for their own escape. A morning radio conference with Billy revealed the full extent of the damage. Besides the truck, which had been destroyed before Longwei and Joy could help, 2 other vehicles sustained damage that required their replacement, Billy choosing to purchase replacements over repair. It bit deeply into the money they had left, but it was unavoidable. The deeper cost was in the dead and wounded. Due to shock, attacks, and wounds, a total of 10 people had died, 3 in the destroyed truck, the truck driver's daughter and wife, and 5 others whose wounds couldn't be stopped in time. Their bodies were wrapped carefully in tarps to be buried when they arrived at the new village. Joy found herself afterwards sitting in the garden of the temple, crying her eyes raw. She had put on a brave face in front of the rest of the village when the news was released, but couldn't face the idea of continuing to falsely pretend like she was superhumanly strong any longer. Her cheek burned, the stitches the doctor put in pulling painfully with every motion of her mouth. The wound was covered in a long strip of gauze, and Joy knew the scar would be ugly when it came off. It didn't matter, however. As she knelt in the grass, her eyes burning, all she could see was the sight of the little girl, her father cradling her body as she breathed her last. Great sobs shuddered through her body and she wailed, her stomach convulsing and the little breakfast she had been able to get down spewing onto the grass between her knees. After what felt like an eternity, the tears dried up, and Joy felt hollowed out, empty. Climbing to her feet, she wiped her lips with the back of her hand, turning to go inside. Maybe, with enough water, she could get the foul taste out of her mouth. Inside the quiet temple, she found Longwei, checking his own wound. His belly was covered in a bright red rash, the damage coming from his running over 2 motorcycles the night before and moving at top speed over rough terrain for so long. Even thick dragon hide couldn't be treated too harshly. "Are you ready?" Joy asked him, burying her feelings deep again.
She knew that deep in the Pandora's box that was her emotions, she was letting only two things remain out. First was her devotion to Longwei and her love of him. The second was her rage. The Triad had hurt her and hurt innocent people. "Yes, I'm ready," Longwei replied, pulling his shirt back down. He came over and took her hand, looking her in the eyes. "Are you okay?" "Okay?" Joy snorted, shaking her head. "It's going to be a long time before I'm okay again, but I can bear down and get these people to safety. If I need to have a breakdown, I'll do it after that." Longwei nodded, when a squawk from the radio caught their attention. Longwei grabbed the handset, pulling it to his ear. A grim smile broke out on his face, and he spoke softly into the microphone. He set the handset down and nodded. "The army will be here in 1 hour. The general heard about the fight and is afraid the Triads will step up their attacks. It's time to move." Joy nodded, and the two left the temple, heading into the village. There was still a lot to do, and not a lot of time to do it in. The end. If you liked that and want to hear more from Joy and Longwei, have a listen to A Dragon's Love Part 1. You can find it linked to in the description, or somewhere in this end screen.